Hello and welcome to another episode of India and Global Left. If you are new to the show, please smash that subscribe button. Also consider being a YouTube member, a Patreon, or donate small amounts in the link given in the description box. But the least you can do is like, share, and comment. Without further ado, let me welcome Glenn Greenwald. Glenn is a journalist, author, and former lawyer. In 2014, he won the Pulitzer Prize for publishing previously unknown information about American and British global surveillance programs based on classified documents handed to him by Edward Snowden. Glenn, welcome to India and Global Left.
Great to be with you. Thanks for inviting me.
I want to start with Trump administration's immigration policy. Of course, the general issue is a broader attack on immigration, which started with tens of thousands of deportations to undocumented immigrants to their place of origin, starting from Mexico and Colombia to India. And we had a full show with Professor Aviva Chomsky on that. So what I want to focus with you are kind of the other two issues on the US immigration policy. So if we could start with the attack on students and protesters related to support of liberation movement in Palestine and Lebanon. Muhammad Khalil, a student of Columbia University, a green card holder, was detained in Louisiana for his alleged support of Hamas. Dr. Raza Alloway, a professor of Brown University, has been deported for her sympathy with late Hezbollah leader Nasrallah, and Ranjani Srinivasan, a Columbia University student from India, got her visa revoked. If you could talk about why the American conservative movement's crusade for free speech against what they perceived as liberal wokeism has now turned into a systematic administrative attack on free speech, largely related to the issue of Palestine and university protests.
Well, to begin with, they're complete hypocrites. They were never really serious about their professed belief in free speech at all. And I mean, this is something that if you talk to anybody who works in defending free speech, as I did previously as a lawyer and now do as a journalist, people who are devoted to it as a principle, you will always see, always, people who profess to believe in free speech when it comes time to defend or protect their political allies or the views with which they agree. And then suddenly they turn around and start justifying censorship when it comes to the views or people they most hate. We saw this throughout the Biden administration. The Biden administration engaged in this very systemic effort to pressure big tech platforms to censor dissent on a wide range of issues, including COVID, but other issues as well. And people like me were saying this is a grave violation of free speech. And I had conservatives right there with me cheering and liberals trying to justify the censorship by saying, oh, this is disinformation, or this is dangerous speech, or this is hate speech, or this is incitement. And unsurprisingly, soon as the conservatives get into power, they're the ones who start immediately posing much graver forms of censorship. We're not talking here about deleting posts or banning people from Facebook or YouTube. We're talking about arresting people and deporting people, obviously in retaliation for their speech. So I don't necessarily see this as an immigration issue. I think the immigration issue is the pretext, the disguise for what's really going on, which is an attack on people who in their minds commit one of the worst crimes you can commit, which is expressing opposition to Israel, protesting the US financing of Israel's wars, which is what the Columbia students are all guilty of. And, the Trump campaign was very open about the fact that they intended to do this. They were saying throughout all of 2024 that they're going to deport all of the students who participated in these protests, even though participating in protests is a fundamental American right. We've had for decades protest movements at colleges that have become iconic in American history against the Vietnam War, against the apartheid regime in South Africa, all throughout COVID, all sorts of different protest movements that have been far more aggressive even than the protest movement was against the Israeli war in Gaza. This is clearly about the fact that the Trump administration is filled with people who are highly devoted to Israel, loyal to Israel, worship Israel, want to use American power to protect the interest of the Israeli government. And on top of that, you have Donald Trump, who really did believe that it was urgent for him to win the campaign in 2024 because that was the only way he could avoid many years in prison, which is probably true. Had he lost, all those prosecutions that the Democrats started probably would have gone forward. And he was willing to do anything to win. And one of the things he needed to do was to get a lot of money from people like Miriam Adelson, who is a former soldier in the IDF. She was an Israeli citizen her whole life. She just became an American citizen recently. And she's very upfront about the fact that all she cares about with her political donations is protecting Israel. And she gave $100 million to Donald Trump and his campaign in 2024. And what she wanted in return is what she's getting, which is an abuse of government power to punish people for the crime of expressing criticism of Israel. And I should note that it's not only green card holders or visa holders. The Trump administration wrote to Columbia University with a long list of demands, including putting the Middle East studies into receivership, but also demanding that all the protesters suffer some kind of punishment, whether it be suspension or expulsion. And now you're seeing Columbia complying with these demands and even expelling American students, American Jewish students, in fact, who helped participate in the protest. So it's really just an attempt to crush dissent about Israel in the United States. And that all comes from the fear that they're seeing public opinion polls changing, Israel becoming less and less popular as people have watched what they've done to Gaza. They were concerned that TikTok was a place that allowed too much criticism, and that's the reason why they ended up banning TikTok or trying to ban it. And they're doing the same at American colleges. They're deeply worried that the way college activism helped bring down the apartheid regime in South Africa in the 1980s is going to succeed in doing that to Israel. And they decided they had to target American academia in particular and try and crush any dissent on Israel that they can. And that's what they're now doing.
Given your helpful reframing of the issue as a free speech issue and primarily an issue of criticism of Israel, I wonder if what are your thoughts about a possible crackdown on the digital space? Because uh, two spaces, in my view, exposed the live stream genocide, and that was influential in changing public opinion. One was the university campus, and that's easy to target. The other is a much larger space, and is the digital space. And it's a bit difficult. And so far, we have been talking a lot about the power of corporations, monopoly firms like X, and so on. And that has been the crusade about free speech when it comes to the digital media. How how um, how suspicious are you about the national security apparatus going after the digital media?
I'm very concerned about any efforts to exert government control over the limits of speech on the internet. It's happening in all sorts of different countries throughout the West, throughout the democratic world, for all different kinds of reasons, with all different kind of targets. It is true that the populist right has been a target of censorship efforts by the EU and by the Biden administration. I was vehemently opposed to that because the minute you let the censorship regime get a foothold on the internet because you're happy about who's being targeted in the first instance, oh, those are my political enemies, I actually do think those people are dangerous, you then endorse the framework itself, and it's just only a matter of time before they start using it against your own allies. And I do have to go back to this issue about the TikTok ban, which I mentioned. The TikTok ban was proposed in 2020, in the last year of Trump's administration. And the argument for those who wanted TikTok shut or a forced sale of TikTok to a friendlier company, a friendlier American company, was that we can't allow the Chinese to infiltrate our country, control public opinion, spy on us. And for a lot of reasons, these arguments were very weak, often untrue, wildly exaggerated. And the solution, which is banning an app that 1/3 of Americans choose voluntarily to use. You're talking about 150 million Americans who aren't forced to use TikTok, but that is the social media platform they prefer to use to organize, to get their news, to express themselves. To just shut an app like that would be a gargantuan attack on free expression on the internet. And, we've always heard China's bad because they don't allow American apps, or this country's bad, Russia's bad because they don't allow Facebook. It's the same thing. It's the same kind of censorship. And they couldn't get enough votes for 4 years when the argument was, oh, we have to do this to stop China. The only time they got the votes, and everybody who's in favor of the TikTok ban admitted that, was after October 7th, when Democrats in particular became convinced that the reason there was so much negative sentiment about Israel was because TikTok was allowing these videos to circulate about what was being done in Gaza. There was too much anti-Israel or pro-Palestinian content. And that's when they decided, not because of China, but to protect Israel, that TikTok had to be closed. And then on top of that, you have things like Elon Musk, who bought Twitter, now X, based on this very broad aspiration to create what he called free speech absolutism, meaning that anything that anybody says is permitted unless it's criminalized. And yet Elon Musk posted a tweet that was widely considered to be anti-Semitic by Jewish groups, and they started condemning him for being an anti-Semite. And to make penance, he flew with Ben Shapiro over to Israel, met with Israeli religious leaders, met with Benjamin Netanyahu. And when he came back, he promised that he would do what Jewish groups around the world have been urging be done, which is censoring the internet in the United States in order to allow fewer or less stringent criticism of Israel to be permitted. And he announced brand new censorship rules where he said, basically, things like Free Palestine or From the River to the Sea will be characterized as genocidal speech, and we won't allow genocidal speech on our platform. Ironically, cheering for Israel's destruction of Gaza is not genocidal. What's genocidal is calling for the liberation of Palestinians. You see it on Facebook now, trying to curry favor with the Trump administration. There is absolutely now, under Trump, an increase in the attempt to crack down on online speech that's aimed at Israel, precisely for the reason that you said, which is the real reason so many people have turned against Israel is because it's been a long time since Israel really bombarded Gaza with bombs. They do it every year, of course, but 2014 was really the last time it was front and center. So you're talking about a whole new generation of people. We're talking about 10 years later who have never really seen the true face of Israel, who have never understood the key role the U.S. plays in arming and funding it. And this was done under a Democrat. And a lot of young people in particular were very disoriented, very kind of disillusioned. Wait a minute. Joe Biden, the person we were told is so decent, is paying for and funding this genocidal war that's killing children every day. We're watching these civilians have their homes blown up, all of Gaza destroyed. And it really did change public opinion. And it only happened because of a free internet. And so, of course, in order to attack this trend that they're really afraid of, they had to start attacking free speech online as well. And that's exactly what they're doing.
Are you a free speech absolutist when it comes to the internet, or do you think there can be any regulation on that?
I don't trust government or, say, a group of experts to determine what is hate speech, to determine what is true and false. The reality is a lot of the things that were described as being false during Russiagate, during COVID, during the 2020 election, when it came to Hunter Biden's laptop, which we were told it was a Russian disinformation plot, a lot of the times what the experts pronounce is true end up being false. And to me, this is kind of the promise of the Enlightenment, which I really believe in as a philosophical revolution. This idea that, look, we've spent, 1,000 years being told what is true and false by monarchs or popes or other heads of churches, and we can't allow this any longer. We have human reason and the capacity to reach our own conclusions, and it's the right of the human being to freely debate issues and decide for ourselves what is true and false. Of course, there's a cost to free speech. There's a cost to every liberty. You give any liberty to anybody, if you restrict the government, for example, from barging in our homes by knocking down our doors to catch criminals, you make it harder for the police to catch criminals because now they have a warrant requirement before they can search people's homes. But we're willing to pay that cost for the freedom of not having the police be able to barge in whenever they want. Of course, there's a cost to just allowing unfettered free speech. Dangerous ideas can be advocated. Things that are false can spread. But I've always thought that even from a pragmatic perspective, trying to censor ideas you regard as dangerous usually have the effect of making them more appealing, of driving them underground, of preventing you from being able to engage them. But on a broader level, I think the dangers and cost of empowering the state or some group of anointed experts to decide for us what is true or what is false, what is hate speech and what isn't, is way too dangerous because it will always be abused. I think the people who want to criticize, who want to suppress criticism of Israel really do believe that the criticisms are false, or they really do believe that it incites hatred against Jews and anti-Semitism. I believe they believe that. And that's why I don't trust anybody to censor in the name of stopping hate speech or disinformation, because inevitably that will be abused in very dangerous ways.
The Trump administration has also deported, I guess it's 238 individuals accused of being members of the Venezuelan gang, trained the Argua to El Salvador, which is not their place of origin, invoking the 1798 Act, the Alien Enemies Act. If you could talk about the significance of the entry of the Alien Act in the US immigration policy.
Sure. So Trump campaigned on a promise of mass deportations for people who enter the United States illegally. And people voted for that. Polls show people favored that. Deportations means that you take the person who's in the United States illegally and you send them back to their country of origin, either the country from which they came or their country of their citizenship. That isn't what is being done in the case that you reference. What is being done is that people who are of Venezuelan origin, who are Venezuelan citizens or citizens of other countries, are being sent to El Salvador, a country that they have nothing to do with, that in most cases, if not all, they've never even visited, because the president of El Salvador offered to receive them and put them into these incredibly repressive prisons that El Salvador has constructed. And the purpose of these prisons is to make certain that essentially you never leave. The idea is that once you're in these prisons, you're judged to be the worst of the worst criminals, and you're there to just be repressed and kept away from society, given no privileges, no human rights, and you're there forever. Now, what's happening here is that the people who the Bush administration have, the Trump administration have sent there are people they accuse of being members of violent Venezuelan gangs, typically. But there's no evidence presented. There's no hearing held. There's no opportunity for the people accused to contest the accusations against them. They just, based on the government's say-so, they're just being thrown into a black hole for life in a country that they have nothing to do with and to which they've never been. And I can't think of very many violations of just the principles of due process worse than this. Now, I will say it's very interesting because a lot of the loudest critics of Donald Trump, and especially these extreme theories that he's invoking, are people who were part of the Bush-Cheney administration. And the reality is that most of these theories come from the war on terror. When I was practicing law and I decided I wanted to go into journalism in 2005, the main reason was I wanted to sound the alarm at how dangerous these war on terror theories are. The idea that the president can basically exercise power in a way that no one could limit what he could do because they had declared war, the war on terror, that he could even put people in black holes in places like Guantanamo with no charges, no hearing, no opportunity to contest the charges. And we learned that many, if not most of the people who were put in Guantanamo, and we were told constantly, oh, you don't have to worry about these people. We promise you, these are terrorists, not just terrorists, but the worst of the worst. And it turns out that the government was just wrong. They lied, they were wrong, whatever it was. There were a lot of innocent people in Guantanamo who spent 15 years there without a trial. And I thought we should have learned the dangers of allowing a president to declare war in a way that doesn't look like any wars. I mean, this Alien Enemies Act has been invoked in World War II, in the Spanish-American War, in prior wars, but that were actually declared wars. the idea that we're now in a war with Venezuelan drug gangs, as opposed to just they're violent criminals inside the United States and have to be treated like all violent criminals, is such an insult to people's intelligence. But the reason they've declared that is because they believe it gives them absolute power to treat the people, whoever they decree is guilty, however they want, that not even courts can review it, not even courts can order one hearing to present evidence of their guilt, just like happened in the War on Terror. Now, in the War on Terror, the Supreme Court did hold in 2008 that even Guantanamo detainees have one right to go into a federal court to try and prove their innocence, to try and debunk the accusations, to say they were never part of any terrorist organization despite the government's accusation. And a lot of them succeeded in proving that, and courts ordered them released. So we have a repeat of this, but in a lot of ways, it's even worse because when you put them in Guantanamo, the courts can order the government to release them because the US government still maintains control of them. Here, we're just sending them off to El Salvador, knowing they're going to be put into prison for life. And the US government could say, if a court orders the person released or concludes they were wrongly accused, oh, we can't even release them. They're not in our custody any longer. They're with El Salvador. And it is a extremely radical power that even if you're comfortable with them using for these 238 accused gang members, because you think there probably are gang members, even if you think that, obviously this is going to wildly and radically expand. That's what happens with all powers. And they're going to basically have the power in their hand to not just deport whoever they want from the United States, but send people to prison outside of the United States for life. And if you're not alarmed by that, you just don't believe in basic constitutional rights or human rights.
You mentioned Guantanamo Bay and the war on terror. There are reports about new tents being built at Guantanamo for potential deportation to Guantanamo. We covered a full show on that with Naomi Paik, who has been covering the history of Guantanamo. So I just wanted to plug in that.
Yeah, just to interject though, that was the plan. Trump announced, and he said, "This is shows how tough I am." That we're going to send illegal people inside the United States illegally to Guantanamo. They subsequently got there, decided the logistics were too difficult, it was too expensive, and they've kind of now abandoned that plan and brought a lot of people back who were in Guantanamo into immigration detention camps. So it wasn't a very well thought out plan, and I think they're now walking that back. But this is something actually worse.
And this is worse, yeah, as you just said. Very quickly, I wonder what has been the legacy of the Supreme Court in particular in adjudicating these kind of litigations, because I assume a lot of them would end up in the higher courts and Supreme Courts. And given its 6-3 conservative majority, thanks to President Trump and Bush again, I wonder what do you expect from the Supreme Court of the United States in this regard?
It is a 6-3 majority. You're right about that. But two of the justices who are in that judge conservative majority, John Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett, have demonstrated a very strong willingness to reject Trump administration arguments. They've done so in many cases. Amy Coney Barrett in particular, when Trump chose her, the liberals accused her of being this kind of corrupt judge who was there to basically make sure that Trump was declared the winner of the 2020 election, even if he lost. And obviously the Supreme Court never got anywhere near that attempt by Trump to declare himself the winner of the 2020 election, but she sided with the liberals on many other occasions. So I do think, and having gone to law school myself, there is this kind of indoctrinated, inculcated set of values that you have about what American justice and what the American constitutional scheme guarantees. And so I think the idea of just declaring the president unlimited in his powers, including even to throw people in prison, in a foreign prison for life with no due process, is something that they're going to have a hard time approving. On the other hand, there's also this tradition in the US Supreme Court that has long existed that says when we are at war, when the United States is at war, the president, as the commander in chief, is at the height of his power. That basically he's even able to do things that he wouldn't ordinarily be able to do when we're not at war, that the court's role to review things is limited, more limited than it would be in peacetime. And that's why Trump declared war against Venezuelan drug gangs, but I'm sure it's going to be immigrants who entered the United States illegally in general, precisely because he knows that the Supreme Court is likely to defer to executive power in wartime. The question will then become, is this invocation of war valid? Is it legitimate? Is it something that the Supreme Court can even review, or is it just the president, as soon as he decrees a war, whether we're in a war or not, it means that he's entitled to do whatever he wants? The war on terror, I never viewed as a war. I always view terrorism as a criminal problem as opposed to a war metaphor. But at least there you had what more looked like an act of war when on September 11th, there was a very violent attack on the United States, killed 3,000 Americans, etc. And you had other attacks as well. Whereas immigration, to try and define that as an invasion, as if a foreign army has invaded the United States and the president has to have the unfettered power to repel it, I think that's going to be a huge stretch. I just wish I could say with confidence how the Supreme Court will look at the invocation of these war powers, but it's difficult to say. I could definitely see them going either way.
I want to switch gears to your thoughts about the US foreign policy under the Trump administration, given a lot of people, mostly people sympathetic to Trump, had viewed Trump to be for peace and definitely anti-war. And for a moment, when it came to U.S.-Russia relationship, there were some glimmer of those normalizations of U.S.-Russia relations after a long time, at least since the fall of the Soviet Union. While from the perspective of the Middle East and even Latin America, it has been at least a continuity of the previous administrations, or I would rather argue a further escalation. What are your views about this image of a peace-loving Trump who doesn't want war?
So I don't think either of those binaries are accurate or helpful. I don't think he's this radical warmonger way outside of the tradition of American presidents, but I also don't think he's some sort of pacifist that just doesn't believe in the use of military power. I think he believes that the United States has been involved in a lot of wars that were unwise, that were unnecessary, that were huge waste of American resources and American lives, and wants to avoid those. So the war in Ukraine is a good example. I think Trump has a very healthy fear of nuclear weapons. He talks about how nuclear weapons are one of the scariest things, if not the scariest thing that exists on the earth, how destructive they have become, way worse than during the World War II, and the US twice used them. And I think he has a healthy fear of war. And I also think he sees war in humanistic terms. He talks a lot about how many people die, how much blood is shed, which is something that is unusual. I would also add that it is true, whatever you think of Trump, that in his first term, he was the only president in decades not to involve the United States in a new war. He inherited some bombing campaigns from Obama that he absolutely escalated and that he promised to escalate during the campaign, including the bombing campaign against ISIS and in Syria and Iraq. Obama was steadily bombing there. Trump loosened the rules of engagement, killed a lot of innocent civilians, and therefore you are right that he escalated that war, but that was a war that he inherited. Same with the bombing campaign in Yemen. President Obama was very active in the Saudi war in Yemen. So, and now, we're seeing, for example, one of the things that happened in Gaza was everybody agrees that had Kamala Harris won the election, the Israeli war would have just continued. There was no effort, no real success in the Democratic Party, the Democratic administration of Biden and Harris getting even close to a ceasefire. Trump comes in, sends his aggressive envoy, says he wants a ceasefire, and a ceasefire did emerge. A very imperfect ceasefire, one the Israelis have repeatedly violated, but it was actually a ceasefire. And I would add to that this idea, and I think today there's news, I haven't seen much of it, but that Trump reached a deal with Putin for a partial ceasefire in Ukraine, that Putin agreed to that. It has to now go to Zelensky and the Ukrainians to see if they agree. But I think the instinct to try and end such a dangerous war where you have NATO and the US on one side, the Russians, which are the largest nuclear power, on the other, is a instinct that I appreciate. Trump was against, Trump was saying things like, why are we doing a dirty war in Syria and trying to remove Bashar al-Assad and create this, vacuum and instability in Syria that will allow militias to take over and many, many innocent people to be killed. Same with Libya. So I think, but now obviously the Israelis are resuming their horrific bombing of Gaza. That's something that Trump not only gave the green light to, but promised Hamas would happen if they didn't release all the hostages. He himself has escalated the bombing of Yemen. He's threatening Iran with war as well. So, it's really a mixed bag. The reason why I hesitate to say, oh, Trump is clearly worse is because the Democrats have gotten the United States involved in so many wars. Were very Kamala ran on the platform that she would fund the war in Ukraine until the very end. No inkling at all to try and resolve it diplomatically under Biden or Harris, whereas Trump wants to. So I think that you do see kind of two instincts in Trump. One is he wants to be considered very tough, very strong, which to him means if we do have enemies, really just blowing them up into smithereens, using very dangerous rhetoric like you're going to be annihilated. But on the other hand, I think he considers it an important part of his legacy not to take the United States into new wars, especially in the Middle East, but really anywhere. And I think you're seeing these two instincts in conflict, whereas for me, the Democrats don't have that instinct at all of trying to avoid war. They think war is a very important and frequently justified weapon of U.S. foreign policy.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with what you said, but I think in certain regards, like when you look at it from Iran, for instance, Trump was very clearly worse than the Democrats. I mean, of course, one can argue that Obama was the one who watered down the P5+1 agreement, and I have interviewed Iranian scholars on that. But Trump was very clearly the one who left no scope of even renegotiating that, and so I'm not sure if your statement about the middle, of course, one can talk about North Korea, one can talk about Russia, but on Cuba, on Venezuela, on Iran, I'm not sure if your analysis is entirely accurate.
No, I think that's fair. I think it's very complex because one of the things that Trump does, and we saw this with North Korea, Trump threatened to destroy North Korea with nuclear weapons. An incredibly reckless thing to do, but he didn't do it. In fact, the United States had an improvement in relations with North Korea in part because of those threats. And you're also absolutely right. Trump pulled out of the lifting of the embargo on Cuba and reimposed it. He, for a while, greenlit coup attempts in Venezuela against Maduro. And with Iran, he just pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal, which the United States and other countries had committed to. But I think what Trump believes and what he's saying is he pulled out of that deal because he thought it was a bad deal. He wants a deal now. He wants a better deal. And he thinks the way to get it is by threatening the Iranians, by putting them into a position of fear that they believe if they don't get a deal, they could be attacked and destroyed. This is Trump's negotiating tactic, going all the way back to his days in real estate. So I do think it's important to distinguish Trump's rhetoric from the policies that Trump is pursuing. I think the problem here is that the Middle East is probably the most dangerous area. And the reason for that is because of the influence of Israel loyalists, people who put Israel first, all around his cabinet, all in the highest positions in the Trump administration, among his most prolific donors, care most about Israel and are constantly putting in his ear whatever they think they need to put into his ear to induce him to go to war with Israel's enemies. And I do think that's a genuine fear. And if the United States goes to war with Iran in any way, even targeted bombing or anything else like that, then I think you'd have to say that Trump has been far worse in foreign policy than anything the Democrats did.
I think this brings me to the sort of uh, a question that you must be tired of addressing, but I thought like it would be a nice, given we have discussed some domestic context. Of course, it's not fair because we haven't discussed labor movement, we haven't discussed climate justice movement, and all those issues actually have to be taken into account to answer this question. But the question is about the larger evil between the Democrats and the Republicans. And my question is, a lot of people gradually, mostly, I am talking about people on the left here. I don't take the liberals very seriously. I mean, I follow the liberal press because they have all the information, but I'm talking about people on the left whose opinions I care. Um, uh, and many of them, or let's say some of them, uh, interpreted your position on the lesser of the two evils as if you believe that the Democrats are worse than the Republicans. So my question is, do you agree with that interpretation? And secondly, what would be your position now, given what we are seeing now under the Trump administration? Would there be some rethinking, or do you think you are largely on the same footing where you used to be before the second Trump administration?
So I don't think of it so much as who's better or who's worse, the Republicans or the Democrats. I think of it more in terms of where is it more likely to be able to improve and progress based on who wins an election. So I want to say, first of all, that I do think you have to have an absolute line that if a party crosses, you refuse to vote for them. And whatever you want to say else about the Democrats or Joe Biden, it was Joe Biden, not Donald Trump, who flew to Tel Aviv on October 9th and promised the Israelis endless amounts of money, endless amounts of weapon, and endless amounts of diplomatic protection for whatever they go and do in Gaza. And he fulfilled that promise. He paid for the destruction of Gaza. The Democrats did. He armed the Israelis to go and destroy Gaza. They never imposed any conditions on humanitarian aid entering. They mouthed some things about it, but never used any leverage to do that. And they also isolated the United States from the entire rest of the world, sacrificed our standing in the world at the UN and other places to shield the Israelis when the entire world was ready to put limits on Israel. And what they were doing, even sanctioning the International Criminal Court for issuing arrest warrants for Netanyahu and his Secretary of Defense. For me to watch that, to watch the Democrats do that, if you really want to call that a genocide and you want to say that Joe Biden was complicit, both of which I believe, I don't understand how it's possible to simultaneously accuse somebody of being complicit in a genocide and then saying that nonetheless we need to vote for this person to keep them in power because they're the lesser of two evils. That's one thing. The other thing is, I think a major mistake the left has made in the United States is that it has signaled to the Democratic Party, no matter what you do to us, no matter how much you disrespect us, you even can cheat against the candidate that we want to win. You can deny us a free election within the Democratic Party and give us Hillary Clinton, even though had you not cheated, Bernie Sanders would have won. You can have Obama intervene in 2020 to make sure Bernie Sanders doesn't win. You can say that we're the worst of all evils, give us nothing. No matter how much you spit on us, no matter how much contempt you show for us, we're still going to promise you unconditional support. We're going to always vote Democrat based on the argument that the Democrats are the lesser of two evils. The minute you do that, and this is true in life, you have no leverage. You give the Democrats no reason to care about anything that you think they're going to. They look at the left and they're like, oh, we don't have to care about the left. The left comes out and votes for us no matter what we do. We can spit on them. We can rail against them. And they're still going to come out and vote for us. But here, these centrists, these independent, these are the people who might not vote for us, and therefore these are the people we have to cater to. So I think it's a huge strategic problem as well, and a major reason why the left hasn't really been able to gain any power. As for the question of the Republicans versus the Democrats, pre-Trump, I absolutely believed the Democrats were better, the Republicans were worse, even if though I hated Democrats. What I think had
Pre-Trump,
happened
pre-Trump first
pre-Trump,
administration.
pre-Trump, pre-Trump, Bush, Cheney, McCain, Romney, that whole crew, that whole era. There was no question to me. I wanted Obama to win in 2008. I wanted him to win in 2012. I wanted Kerry to win in 2004. So I thought, as for all the reasons I explained to you, that these war and terror policies were very dangerous, and not just that, but a lot of other things. What Trump did is that he introduced into the American right and into conservative politics a huge split. Remember, in 2016, Trump didn't run against the Democratic establishment. He ran against the Republican establishment. He had to because they were all behind Jeb Bush. And he attacked warmongering and neoconservatives. He attacked Reaganomics and the whole idea of what conservative economics had been. Steve Bannon's vision was, let's get into office, raise taxes on the rich, do a border deal, infrastructure deal with the Democrats so that we can pay, use that money that we get for raising taxes on the rich to pay for the infrastructure deal, and then build a wall. On top of that, you see Steve Bannon now, out there ranting and raving against the idea that we might go to war against with Iran, or that we're bombing Yemen. You see that from Tucker Carlson. You see that from a big range of people on the American right. When it came time to fund the war in Ukraine, every single Democrat, not even one token opposition, every last one of them, from AOC and Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib to whoever the most right-wing parts of the Democrat, they all voted yes to fund the NATO war in Ukraine. There were about 6 to 7 dozen votes in the Republican Party, mostly on the populist right, the kind of MAGA people, who said, why are we engaged in war now? Even yesterday, Marjorie Taylor Greene came out with a statement and said, we have no business fighting wars for other countries, meaning Yemen and Iran. We have no business fighting in the Middle East for Israel. And that kind of mentality never existed in the American conservative politics before. It was sort of marginalized. You had it from Pat Buchanan and Ron Paul, but Trump mainstreamed it. And then on top of that, the kind of animosity toward the US security state. And so I looked at the Democratic Party, which, especially in reaction to Trump, aligned with the CIA, the FBI, the Pentagon, became uber militaristic with this, jingoistic rhetoric about Trump being a Russian agent that came right out of the Cold War, that was McCarthyism, and essentially supporting all of these militaristic institutions that the left had long opposed. But when's the last time you heard AOC criticize the CIA or the NSA or Homeland Security? She doesn't. Neither does Bernie Sanders. They became allies with those agencies. And it was only on the American right where you saw this division, where it was you can call it isolationism, you can call it whatever you want, but there was a sense that we have been fighting way too many wars in the world. We've been fighting them for other countries, not for our own citizens. And there's also this sense of we have to stop serving corporate power. You saw that when Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy wanted to introduce or increase the number of H-1B visas, and a lot of the hardcore MAGA true believers said, what do you mean? Why are we going to import a bunch of people from foreign countries to work for corporations at lower wages? They're indentured servants. They take jobs from Americans. We shouldn't be thinking about corporate profit. We should be thinking about the American worker. And so it just became a more vibrant, interesting part of our political framework, what was happening with right-wing populism against the Republican establishment. And I thought the floor might be lower, where worse things could happen. But I also thought the ceiling was higher in terms of what could be achieved. I'll just give you one last thing so I don't go on forever, which is my former colleague at The Intercept, Jeremy Scahill, now works at Dropsite News, was always quoting this thing that the reporter Seymour Hersh said, which is Seymour Hersh described the potential of Trump as being what he called a circuit breaker, meaning that there is this sort of bipartisan establishment dogma that has ruled Washington for decades, both foreign policy and economic policy, and it has largely been very destructive to a lot of different things of decency. Kamala Harris had zero chance, zero willingness, zero ability, zero intention to change any of that. Trump is somebody who comes in and just breaks things like a bull in a china shop. And sometimes there's a health and a benefit to just kind of breaking things, especially things that should be broken. But sometimes the things that get broken are valuable and actually create harm. But at least there's potential there to finally, the left has always had an institutional critique of the United States, a fundamental ideological critique of the United States. But the Democratic Party doesn't share that critique, has no interest in serving it. It's really this rhetoric that you hear on the right, very vocal voices on the right against these wars in the Middle East, the war in Ukraine, the CIA spying on Americans with no warrants. So that's what interested me. Not, oh, I think the Republicans are better, but that it seems like there's a scrambling effect that's possible with the MAGA movement, with the populist right, in a way that isn't true for the establishment Democratic Party, which is still the wing very much in control of the party.
Can I ask one more question, or do you need to go?
Sure. Sure.
Okay.
No, good.
Yeah. No. I'm curious. Given you have always uh, advocated for free speech against, and the context before Trump was what the conservative movement has regarded as wokeism. And a lot of that has to do with cancel culture, deplatforming people, and so on and so forth. Um, you are a non-binary person. I am curious.
I'm not non-binary. I'm gay. I'm not non-binary.
Yeah. I'm curious how you look at the conservative movement's rhetoric against gay lesbian people. Granted that there has been a woke or elite weaponization of diversity, which the criticism I share with, but I also get worried personally about the conservative rhetoric against any kind of diversity. I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, so I personally don't think that Trump cares about or bears any animosity toward gay men and lesbians. He's been a billionaire in Manhattan for the last 40 years. He was a star in Hollywood on a television program out in Los Angeles. He's been around gay people his whole life. He never exhibited the slightest opposition to gay people. He's never suggested he's opposed to gay marriage or anything like that. I don't think that's it.
Sorry, I'm thinking about the conservative movement in general, not Trump necessarily.
No, yeah, exactly. I'm getting to that. So I think that the area that is in danger is not really gay men and lesbians, but I think trans people, people who have a different gender expression. And I think what happened is twofold. One is I've talked about this before that, when we were doing gay activism in the late 80s and 90s, which is when I was in law school and starting, my adult life. And the idea was never let's try and prevent people from expressing anti-gay views, because the way that you can change people's minds is by listening to their anti-gay assumptions and then engaging them and persuading them that those are wrong. Whereas if you ban them from saying it, if you shame them, if you get them fired for saying it, it just drives it underground, like we were talking about before. And I think part of the left sentiment on culture wars has been, no, we want to ban them from saying that. We don't want to allow it at schools. We want this to be a rule violation if people speak against LGBTs. We want to have them barred from the internet or from major platforms and saying it. And I think when you try and prevent people from saying something that they believe, it reinforces that belief and even creates a resentment towards the issue. And I think part of what has happened is people have a growing resentment, especially on trans issues, a very new gender ideology where they feel like they're not allowed to question it. And it's created a lot of kind of contempt and latent hatred that is now finding expression in the Trump movement. On top of that, I think in some ways, I personally believe I'm a strong believer in the right of trans people to live their lives with full legal equality. But I think there's been some overreach when you start talking about trans kids, surgeries and hormones for trans kids. A lot of people have real questions about that. And I think that has also produced a backlash. And along with, say, the issue of trans women playing in women's sports, but I think that's kind of secondary. So I don't think it's coming from Trump per se. I think what Trump's anti-diversity rhetoric is doing, and theoretically, this was just against the idea of affirmative action. Like, oh, we have to make sure if we're going to hire, we have this number of people and this number of people and that number of people. That's how it was originally explained and justified. But it's given license to some of the worst primal hatreds that are finding expression. It's no longer concerned about trans people with kids or trans people in sport. It's just a hatred of trans people in general. It could easily spill over, even though Trump himself, I think, doesn't want that, into hatred toward gays and lesbians. It certainly spilled over into hatred for immigrants, not just ones who are here legally, but also legally. And those are, of course, things I worry about. These are real dangers from the kinds of sentiments that clearly have been unleashed.
Glenn, it was a pleasure having you on.
Hi, my name is Ayushman. I, along with Jyotisman, have started this platform. In the last 2 years, we have tried to build content for the left and progressive forces. We have interviewed economists, historians, political commentators, and activists so far. If you have liked our content so far and want us to build an archive for the left, I have two requests for you. Please do consider donating for the cause. Link is in the description below. Also, if you are not able to do so, don't feel sad. You can always like our videos and share our videos to your comrades. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.